This is Tom Daly doing an interview for Oral History at Deerfield. And my guest today is Rob Freeman. So Rob, let's begin with your full name.
Okay.
And where you were born and how old are you?
My full name is Robert Noble Freeman. I was born in Pulaski, Tennessee, actually outside of Pulaski, Tennessee, because I was born on a farm at home. And I am 77 years old.
Okay. What brought you to this place?
We had friends, we've been down in Flat Rock for the last 14, 15 years where we had retired. And we had friends who were here, and then we knew a resident who had done a really good comparison of all the facilities for places to grow old. And we looked at that, and Deerfield stood out. We came up, met the people, looked at some things, and it just seemed like the right place for us. And some years later, it certainly was.
Yeah. Where else have you lived?
We've lived all over. I lived in Tennessee for a very long time. Went to school there, and when I was in the service, I was various places. Since Sandy and I have been married, we lived in Statesboro, Georgia. We lived in Augusta, Georgia. We lived in Glenville, West Virginia. Then we moved to Flat Rock, and were there till we came here.
Okay. What is the earliest ancestor that you know about? Where and when did they live?
Probably the earliest one I know would be my grandmother. She lived in central Middle Tennessee, a little place called Brick Church. And when I knew her, she was probably I'd probably say in her 50s. Everybody looked old to me at that particular point. So that would have been in the 1950s. I was born in 45, so probably by the time I recognized it'd be sometime in the 50s. And she died early 1960s, so she was a pretty elderly woman at that particular point in time.
What was she like?
She was great. She had never been to school. Gotten married early, as that happened in those particular times. And she had a bunch of children, as you also happened in those particular times, and pretty much had been a farm wife all her life. And I don't think did everything else. She never drove, or not a car anyway. But that's probably the earliest one that I remember.
Tell me about your parents.
My dad was a sharecropper. He had a second grade education. My mother had a sixth grade education, and he had met her she was waitressing in a little cafe, and they met on one of my dad's pass-throughs during World War II, and got married, and shortly thereafter I came from that. But my dad was, we sharecropped for a very long time, and then he worked kind of with a subsidiary of the post office, a pretty much laboring job, because he was very bright, but he didn't have the education. So, and my dad didn't read very well, so that always held him back when he was taking any kind of test to strengthen his skills and so forth. And my mom was a housewife all her life. Like her mother, she never drove. She had kids and took care of kids and took care of the family.
Mm-hmm. So you have brothers and sisters?
Yeah, I have. I'm the oldest of four. Have a sister and two brothers. And one of my brothers just passed away recently. So there's just three of us left now. But there were four children.
What was the relationship like among those four children?
Growing up, I was the oldest, so I was probably a pain in the butt to most of them, because being bigger, I got to do more things on the farm, and when you live on a farm, everybody works, and so it's either in a garden or it's doing whatever you're big enough to do. And I think they probably wanted to do the things I was doing. Looking back on it, it was child labor, obviously, but we were competitive. We like kids, we fought, and so forth. Our sister was probably the meanest of all of us. You know how boys, when they're getting angry, they'll do a lot of posturing in terms of, maybe I'll intimidate you. Not my sister. She'd just pick up a bottle and whack you over the head with it. And I experienced that. I still have a scar to this day from her whacking me on top of the head. But I think it's, I think it's probably a normal kind of growing up things. And we got a little separated when we got older, and everybody went their own way. But growing up, it was, loving, fighting, as kids do. It was just kind of what kids do.
Tell me about the building your family lived in, the house you lived in. Can you describe it?
Yeah, on the farm, one of the things sharecroppers do is they get a house to live in, and then they work the land, and they get a portion of the crop, and whoever the landowner is provides the money for the seed and some of that stuff. We lived in a house that didn't have electricity. We didn't have indoor plumbing. We didn't have so we had a well outside where you went out and got the water. It didn't have screens on the windows, so you kind of lived in the summer. You lived with what was there, and in the winter, we heated with a wood stove, and it had 2 bedrooms, and so my mom and dad had one, our sister had the other, and the 3 boys, we slept on pallets, which is just quilts on the floor,
yeah.
And as close to the stove as we could in the wintertime, and sometime in the summer just out on the porch just to sleep. But looking back, it was idyllic in some ways. I mean, you cooked with a wood stove, and so it's probably more rustic looking back than it was going through it, but I didn't know any different, so it seemed to be pretty cool. And lots of friends that I had, they lived the same way, so we didn't know it was, we didn't know we were poor because everybody else we knew was poor as well.
Right. As a child, did you live in more than one place?
We did. We lived on a couple of farms. My dad, the first place we lived, we moved to another farm up near a little town called Cornersville, which is maybe 15 miles from where we were, and he sharecropped there for, I think he got a better deal or something, I'm not sure, and we lived there for several years, and then when I was 10 is when Dad got the job with the subsidiary of the post office, and we moved to Nashville, and so from 10 until I went to college and so forth, we lived in Nashville.
What was the neighborhood or community that you grew up in? A town nearby, a group, and what was the local hanging out place?
Well, on the farm, there really was not a hanging out place per se, because it was all scattered out, and we would go to school. And
but as a teenager?
As a teenager, later in Nashville, there were some Shoney's that we'd hang out. In those days, kids would. Who had a car, which I never did, but we'd go and drive around Shoney's and so forth. And I played a lot of sports, so there were always, the football guys or the baseball guys or the basketball guys. We'd all sort of hang out together as much as we could. I lived in a housing project some distance from the school. We were kind of on the outer periphery of the school district. So, and without a car, it was a little more challenging for me until some of my buddies got cars and they'd pick me up and so forth. But it was, again, it wasn't happy days kind of stuff, but you didn't know any different, so it was what it was and so forth.
Yeah. What kind of sports did you play?
As my mother would say, anything that had a ball in it that I tried to do. I was fortunate that I was a big kid early, and I was young, because I had skipped a grade or so in elementary school, so I was a big kid. So I played football in football season. I played basketball in basketball. I played baseball in baseball season. And as part of your conditioning, the coach made you run track and do those things. We didn't have golf or tennis or any of those kinds of things. So pretty much baseball, football, and basketball.
Yeah, no pickleball.
No pickleball in those days. No, it would have been interesting if they had been pickleball. I'm sure I'd have played it.
What schools did you go to, including after high school?
I was fortunate enough to get a football scholarship when I graduated to Middle Tennessee State University, which is about 30 miles away. And so I played football there for 4 years. And, I was never great, but although the older I get, the better I seem to have been. But I was never particularly great, but I was good enough to play, and that was important. When I graduated there, I stayed on as a teaching assistant and took a master's degree in colonial history there. And because I intended to be a history professor, which was what my initial ambition was to be. But Uncle Sam felt that I was essential to the war effort, which is kind of a story unto itself. And so when I got back from the service, I did some work and got interested and went to Vanderbilt and took a master's in clinical psychology at Vanderbilt, and then worked for a while, and then took the PhD at the University of Tennessee. So those was my
And your PhD was in?
clinical psych.
Okay.
Clinical psych, with the emphasis on my master's had more emphasis on family relations and marriage and sexuality. The PhD was more on children and problems and disabilities that children were having.
Did you have a favorite teacher, either growing up or as an adult?
I did. There was a high school English teacher, Vivian Collier was her name. And when I went to Nashville, when I got in 7th grade, being a country boy, I talk like I ain't seen none of them there, dogs and, and I was just, it was colloquial speech is what it was. And I remember the first or second time I met in Miss Collier's English class, she pulled me aside and said, "I think you're a fairly bright youngster, but the way you talk makes you sound stupid." And she said, "If you will work with me, I'll help you with that." And so what she did is she made me aware of what I was saying. And so basically she got me to listen to what I was saying. And she got me, as a result of that, I became very sensitive to that. And she got me into forensics and so into public speaking and into debate. And so we were state champions, my partner and I, in high school. And then when I went to Middle Tennessee to play football, I also debated. And we weren't national champions there. We got beat in the finals of another Tennessee school, Carson Newman College. We got beat by 2 ministers who were great speakers, by the way.
How did you and your family celebrate holidays?
On the farm, since we didn't have a lot of money, I think we did it the best way we could. We would cut a tree, but we didn't have ornaments because we didn't have power for lights and stuff. So we'd tie ribbons and stuff to the tree as best we could. I remember we would get, Mother would get like hard candy for us as kind of a gift. And so hard candy was a Christmas gift for us for years on the farm. When we moved to Nashville and had electricity and all that other kind of stuff, had a little more resources, we did a little more of the traditional kinds of things. But on the farm, we kind of made it ourselves.
Any favorite memories?
Of the Christmas or the holidays?
Any celebrations?
Gosh, that's a tough one. God, they all kind of blend together. I don't know that I have a favorite one that was there.
Okay, tell me about your long-term relationship.
Well, I met my long-term relationship when I was a professor at Georgia Southern down in Statesboro. She had moved there from Puerto Rico, and we played tennis together at the same place. I was playing tennis at that particular point. Our sons played tennis together on the high school team and were good friends. So
she had been previously married?
She was married at that time, because we had no romantic relationship. We were just good friends, at that particular time. And unfortunately, she lost her son in a car accident, tragic car accident. And I had lost touch with her after that. I didn't know what was going on. And so my relationship was ending in my first marriage, which had produced two great kids. And I guess it was maybe, I don't know, maybe a year and a half later, a friend of ours individually invited us to a Christmas party. And as I say, I'd lost touch with her. I knew she still lived in town, but I didn't know what was going on. And so at the Christmas party, we met and started chatting a little bit and reminiscing, and had a nice time. The next week, I called her and took her out to dinner, and basically we've been together ever since. It's just I think we've been married 35 years now.
You think?
Well, it's best to know, but I think it's 35 years. But it seems like we've always been together. You don't dismiss the first relationship because we have the children, and since Sam didn't have any other children, our kids and her both have adopted each other as as parent and child. And it's been great. It really has been super.
Well, tell me about those children and any grandchildren.
Yeah, have six grandkids. Our son David is as bad as it is, or I guess weird. He's going to retire next year. He'll be 55 next year. He is heads up a school psychology program up in a place north of Georgia. He's a school psychologist and has been for a long time. He has 3 boys, and their oldest boy is in a PhD program at the University of Pennsylvania, getting married in June of this year. So we're looking forward to that. And he also has twin boys who are in their early 20s and working. Our daughter Tricia was trained as a dental hygienist and worked in that field for a very long time. Had a daughter herself, and then remarried and got 2 other children with that relationship. Her husband is a electrical engineer in the nuclear business, and their children, there's 2 daughters. One of them's in the medical field, the other manages rental properties, and the other is an EMT. So, we're just blessed. We've had, and we have 1 great grandbaby now. Sadie D is the great grandbaby, but we've been blessed in the sense that all the kids have done well. They to me, they look like pretty remarkable parents, and we've not had the kind of problems that people I've worked with have had challenges. I mean, they've had their own challenges, but they're just great kids, and so we're just really proud of them.
Okay, switching gears a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
What were you like growing up? And what were your interests? Who were your friends? But mainly, what kind of a child were you?
Well, as I say, I was the oldest of 4. So, and I don't remember being the only kid. I've seen pictures when I was the only kid, but I don't remember that. But I remember having, I remember there were always kids around, because I had a sister and the 2 brothers, and we're about 21 months apart. So we always had those around. And I had a cousin who lived in a farm not too far from me, who was 4 years older than me, and pretty much he was my peer. And I don't know if he was a great peer because we used to fight all the time and get ourselves in trouble and so forth. But I think I was a hard-working kid because on the farm I really liked the work.
Were you serious? Were you a comedian? Were you a bully?
Well, I think I probably used humor as a tension releaser from time to time. When I went to school, I was a kid who school came easy for me. It wasn't particularly a challenge, but so I enjoyed school, but it was something I did well, and so it. But I love sports. I love physical activities. I loved the hiking. I loved the hunting. So I was a pretty physical kid. I don't think I've ever, my mind, I don't know if I've ever bullied anybody. It's, I liked people. I kind of took people for where they were and gave them in my mind, gave them the right to be whoever they were. I don't never held grudges. I'm not, it's still something I didn't do. But I
So
consider.
did that come from your parents, the way that they were?
I think it was. The thing that I was blessed with was not resources. I was blessed with love. As we say, we didn't have a lot, but we had that. But you don't know you have it because it's just what it is. And later, when you get into other situations and you realize other people didn't have that, you're surprised a little bit. Like, what do you mean other people didn't have that? But I think, regular farm kid. Had my family not moved to Nashville, I might have been a farmer. I don't know. Because, as I say, I left when I was 10. I had driven tractors, which I thought was the coolest thing around, because a 10-year-old on a tractor is, you're smoking, and working it on the farm. But I think to me, just a regular farm kid who was happy. I don't remember being particularly sad at any time during that period. I was just happy. None of my relatives at that point had ever died, so I didn't know anything about that. I'd seen animals obviously die, and we obviously harvested animals in the seasons for pigs and the kind of things that you do. But I think just a regular kid.
Did you have a favorite dog?
I did. We had a dog, some kind of mongrel dog, I'm sure, maybe say of mixed background, a dog named Shep. Shep followed us everywhere. Wherever you were, Shep was there. Shep, I think we lost Shep probably a year or so before we moved to Nashville. So most of my childhood, Shep had been with us.
Yeah.
Was just a part of the family.
Are there any stories that were passed down in your family?
Not as many as I wish there had been. How my mom met my father was one of the stories. Some uncles had some stories, but not as many, Tom, as I wish I had.
Okay. Now you mentioned your job when you first started teaching as an assistant. How did your career or job skills change over the years?
Well, I did a 180-degree turnaround. As I say, I was on the road to being a college professor. A history professor was what I was going to be. And when I realized I was going into the service, I decided I'd rather go in the Navy as the Army. And so I went to OCS in Pensacola, and then I went to flight school in Pensacola. And so for the years I was in the Navy, I was an aviator. I was flying. And so for that period of time, when I came back, I had an accident in an airplane. I had a hydraulic failure and had to eject. And when I did, I tore up my right knee and had to have it operated on. And the flight surgeon said the knee would not be particularly reliable for flying, and I could transfer to the line Navy because I was a lieutenant at that particular point, or I could go home. And home was my choice. But I needed a job, and so since I had a history background, I took a job in an experimental program with emotionally disturbed boys, basically trying to teach history to them, which was an adventure. But I worked with those kids for about a year and became very interested in children who they were very brave kids, because basically what they'd done is rejected the entire system. It takes a lot of courage to do that. So I got very interested in those kind of issues and realized that many of the problems those kids were having stem from family issues. And then I was given the opportunity to go to Vanderbilt and went there and did the master's in clinical psych, and really was in private practice for some period of time, dealing mostly with human relations, sexuality kind of challenges in families, trying to figure out where family dynamics break down and what makes families work well and what causes problems for families. And so when I realized that I really still wanted to be a college professor, I didn't want to be a therapist. I went to the University of Tennessee and was a teaching fellow there, and took the PhD there, and then became a college professor. I went to Ohio, up to Bowling Green State University as a new assistant professor. I gave up a job making about $38,000 for one making 14, but that's to start your career. And so, I went through the processes of being a professor and, moving up the ranks of assistant associate, department chair, full professor, and then became a dean, vice president, and then finally a university president when I retired.
And that was where?
University president, Glenville State University in central West Virginia.
Okay.
School of about a little over 2,000 students, primarily first generation kids. Really marvelous place to be.
Now, you mentioned clinical psychology before. Tell me about that. That's when you decided not to pursue that?
No, I tested it out for a while. Once I finished Vanderbilt, and passed my boards and so forth, and you had to work for so much in an intern and did all of that kind of stuff. I actually worked in a practice for several years, seeing families and seeing individuals over a period, and I found out it was kind of exciting at first, but after a period of time, it kind of wore you down a bit, and I would find myself becoming inattentive. And I realized as a therapist, that's the kiss of death. And so I said, I'm going to sit down and talk to yourself. What do you want to do? What do you want to be when you grow up? And the answer was not a 30-year counselor. And I said, okay, well, if you want to be a college professor, let's go be a college professor. And I've always had an interest in history. I maintained that interest, but I guess I was so deep into the psychology of people and so forth that I thought that was the field to go, and it was. I mean, I've been very blessed to do my writing and my teaching, and I love being a college professor. So it was kind of a redirect at some point in time.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned the military. Was there any particular experience in the military that you remember vividly?
Yes. The last one.
That was the ejection.
Yes.
Yeah.
That was the last one.
But what was it like being in the military?
I enjoyed the military. And I was a little surprised that I did. But I saw, particularly going through OCS, which, they do a lot of stuff to you. But I kind of saw that as a game because, again, I have an interest in psychology always, but I just kind of knew what they were doing. But I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the flying. I enjoyed all the training that we did, and met a lot of really guys, nice guys that you flew with. A couple of them didn't get back from Vietnam, but it was they're just good people.
Did you see active service?
I did not. I had orders for Vietnam, and we were to ship out within about 2 weeks when I had the hydraulic failure on the.
Yeah, tell me about that experience.
I had ferried an airplane to Pensacola so that I could see the family because I knew we were getting ready to go to Vietnam, and so I had about 10 days while they were doing something. I didn't even know what they were doing in the airplane anymore. And my flight officer and I had a backseater. We got in the airplane to take off, and we took off, and we were at about 5,000 feet, and I hit the afterburner to kind of goose us a little bit, and all of a sudden, all sorts of things started happening. I got lights. I got a little bit of a horn. We had a complete hydraulic failure, which on an F4, without hydraulics, you're basically a rock. We were fortunate. I was able to kind of muscle the plane into an attitude where it went into the bay, and we both ejected. And I remember coming down, it was a real windy day, and I saw my flight officer's going to land in the water, and I'm going to land on the beach. The problem was I was swinging in my chute, and I couldn't get control of my chute, and I slammed into the bank of the sand dune and tore up the knee. And so that the very vivid memory of the military. Had that not occurred, you know, I would have been going to Vietnam. I probably would have been okay because at that period of time, that was late 72-ish. It was winding down a lot in Vietnam, but I would have had to have gone. And whether
the last few months were pretty terrible.
yeah, it could have been. Yeah, on the ground. It maybe not. It wasn't so bad. Probably out in the Gulf where the carrier was stationed and so forth. I don't know what it would have been. I didn't experience that, and people I've talked to who were friends of mine and did experience it. It wasn't any fun.
Besides sports, do you have hobbies?
Many of my hobbies revolve around sports. You know, I play golf, pickleball now. I play pickleball. Even in my adulthood, I played basketball. I continue to play softball. Sandy and I sing now. She kind of got me into singing. I didn't have a lot of experience with singing. The only singing experience is in college. I was in a hootenanny group because that was the hootenanny era, and we were called the Enharmonic Three. We had a guitar, a banjo, and I played stand-up bass. And we were a big hit at the fraternity and sorority parties because everybody was singing Michael Row the Boat Ashore and all that. I don't remember who it was. One of us had a Canadian folk group album. And so we learned those 10 folk songs from Canada. They thought we were cool because we were singing stuff nobody else was singing. But singing became a big part of it. And Sandy and I have had the opportunity. We've sung with symphonies. We've sung with choral groups. We have had the great privilege to sing at the Flat Rock Playhouse for years. In that chorus, we've done singing at church. We sing here at Deerfield and enjoy it. So probably sports. We've done a lot of hiking, done a lot of whitewater canoeing and so forth. But physical kinds of stuff typically is what I've been interested in.
Yeah. What organizations have you been a part of, and what did they do?
Been part of, obviously, a lot of professional organizations around psychology and so forth, and those kind of ground you by putting you where other people are. I was a member of Rotary for some period of time until my schedule got to the point that I couldn't make the meetings, and so I thought Rotary was a great philanthropic kind of group. I enjoyed, those kinds of folks, but primarily professional things. And a lot of things revolved around church, obviously.
Do you have a particular venue of music that you like?
I like all music. I didn't think I would enjoy what my dad would have called highfalutin music, which was, Mozart, Verdi, and all of that. But I really enjoyed. Probably my favorite piece of classical music is Verdi's Requiem, which we've sung several times. But I like folk music. I like some country. I'm not as heavy. Sandy probably likes country more than I do. But the rock and roll era, which I grew up with, I like a lot of that kind of music. And when we were living in Flat Rock, Sandy directed a show chorus, and so we got to sing a lot of that kind of music, a lot of show tunes, and we dress up costumes and dance and do various kinds of stuff. But I'm not a hard rocker or acid rock, or I've never gotten into rap. I think that's maybe an age thing. The kids now seem to enjoy it, but I don't dislike it. It's just something I never got into. But I like most genres.
Do you have a favorite song?
Boy, that's really a tough one.
Well, maybe you.
Yeah, I probably do have a favorite.
You and Sandy.
Well, it's funny. My favorite show tune is that oddly enough, I got to sing this back last spring, was from Les Mis, called "Bring Him Home." I had it was one of my bucket list things. I'd never gotten a chance to sing it because I'd never been in a situation or a venue where I could do it, and maybe didn't have the skills to do it, which is another thing. But here in our Deerfield chorus, we did kind of a musical kind of thing, and there was that song was there, and so I got the opportunity to sing that, and one of my great thrills. It really was just something that I enjoyed. There are a lot of rock and roll songs that you like, and so forth, but so I couldn't specify one of those, but Bring Him Home was real special to me.
Who had the greatest influence on you as a child or as an adult? Now, you've mentioned this
English teacher, yes.
But would she have been the greatest influence, or were there other people?
No, I've been very fortunate to have mentors along the way.
Mm-hmm.
My dad was probably the greatest influence because I saw him strive against what I saw were almost insurmountable kinds of obstacles, and it didn't bother him. So that was, he was extraordinarily bright, very gifted and talented, just hadn't gone to school and just didn't have some of those kinds of skills. But I think like Miss Collier in high school was a great mentor to me. When I was in college as an undergraduate, I had a debate coach who was strong influence. When doing my master's degree, a fellow named Nicholas Hobbs, who was a huge leader in the field of child psychology, was a big mentor. And then in my PhD program, I had some strong mentors. And then as I've moved along from position to position, I've had faculty and mentors like that. So I've been very blessed to have people who, when you were being an idiot, told you were. That's a great gift to have.
Okay. What would you say are the greatest challenges you've faced in your life?
I think the poverty that we experienced early would have been a real challenge, because with the poverty comes a different set of expectations. My parents wanted us to do well, but they didn't know what well was. They just wanted us to do well. And I know, like, I was the first one in my family to ever go to college, for example. I was young, but I think I always felt like I had to work a little harder, try a little harder, maybe to be successful, because I had come from something from the poverty, which maybe made me feel a little intimidated by things that other people had, until I realized those things really didn't matter so much. My theory has always been, because I've never felt like I was the brightest light on the tree. My theory was, I'm not the smartest person in the room, but I can outwork whoever's in the room. And so even athletically, my theory was, let's outwork. And so I'd try to outwork. In school, I would try to work harder. If it took the extra hour, I gave it the extra hour. And so that's kind of been the way I've worked with that. And maybe that comes, Tom, from the poverty. I don't know. I haven't done a self-analysis to that point to know whether that's true or not. But that's a sense I have. That probably was the basis for a lot of that.
How has the world changed since you were young?
The word "totally" probably would be appropriate. I think
To compare the world when you were growing up to now.
Yeah, like I don't remember much of the late '40s. The early '50s kind of thing was, and on a farm, your life is so different from what people are if they're in the city. I just assumed things would always be like they were. The seasons come, the seasons go. You do this, you do that. and when I got to Nashville and got into a little more cosmopolitan kind of thing, you thought you'd go to school and go out and get a job and do whatever. You didn't know what that meant, but you just figured you would. The biggest scare we had during that period of time was probably the Cuban Missile Crisis, which was scary. We had Sputnik, go up, and everybody thought the Russians would be putting nuclear bombs up there within 15 minutes and so forth. But I think it was at least what I experienced, it probably wasn't, this is huge generalization, I think it was a gentler, kinder, more caring world. I think we cared for each other more. We were interested, maybe not just cared, but we were interested in what other people did. I think as this country has grown and matured, and if it is matured, I think we've lost some of that. I think the family unit is not the same as it once was, and so people live in neighborhoods, but they're not part of the neighborhood. Mm-hmm. So I think I would sense that would be a huge change that I've seen. I know things go up and down in terms of, is the world going to end tomorrow or not end tomorrow? There are a whole lot more possibilities of how the world might end now. I didn't know about aliens or any of that stuff growing up, but I just think the world's gotten to be a little scarier place. Probably not as civil a place, probably not as, maybe even the word nice a place to be. But I think as a result of that feeling, you find your own niches where that does exist. And Deerfield is one of those places where that does exist, where there are people who care about you and you care about them, and you get close very quickly. I mean, we've been here 4 years, and we have people we feel we've known our entire life, and that's pretty amazing, because that requires risk on both sides, and possibly the reason for that is we don't figure we got that much time. We better get on with it.
That's true. So you've mentioned some of these things before, but what kind of values did your family or community teach you? And are there ways your views have changed over time? Those are two separate questions.
I think the values that the family hit us with hard was honesty. Your name means something. If you say you're going to do something, you do it. Caring for each other. I think those were strong values, and I don't think those in my mind have changed as I've grown older. I'm not sure what the second part of the question was.
Ways in which your views have changed over time.
I've probably gotten more cynical over a period of time, probably less trusting. And part of that has to do with experiences that you've had, obviously. I don't think the caring hasn't changed. It's very important to me that if I say I'll do something, I'll do it. What people think of me is important based on what I've done. If they make decisions about me that I didn't have anything to do with, then that's their issue, and either their loss or their gain, I don't know. But I think I've probably become more cynical. I've had great faith in the American people's ability to always address everything. I still have that, but it's shaken. Mm-hmm. The last 5-6 years or so has shaken that somewhat. And so I've become a little more cynical about that. And that, I think, it's not only just politically, which is its own world, but just in how people work with each other in the world now. I don't think there's the trust basis is not there as much as it once was. The caring basis is, I think, and Deerfield is, in my mind, a shining light of exception. But at least in my experiences with here. But that's probably the big one that's changed for me.
What historic events, marches, protests, performances have you experienced? Now, you mentioned the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Yeah, Cuban Missile Crisis was a big one. The assassination of John Kennedy, obviously, in most minds. Martin Luther King's assassination, because I remember exactly where I was in those particular periods of time. I was teaching a class, and I remember the department chairman came down and said, Martin Luther King has been assassinated. I think those were extremely significant kinds of things.
Yeah, the Vietnam War.
Vietnam War, obviously, yeah, and you know, the Vietnam War and the 1960s in general have had massive impact on where we are now in the world.
Yeah.
And of course, 1960s was a reaction to the 1950s to some extent, where we had gotten so materialistic in the 50s and the 60s. A lot of young people tried not to be materialistic. Of course, many of those people now are, but I think those were, you know, extremely significant from a national standpoint. The fall of the Berlin Wall was extremely significant because I think everybody breathed a relief, a sigh, like, whew, well, you know, the Cold War is over and we're going to be fine. And now we're back with Ukraine and so forth. So it didn't go away, it just took a respite.
Yeah. What are your memories of events such as segregation, the civil rights movement?
In Nashville, where I was when I was old enough to know what was going on, we had what I would refer to as cultural segregation, and that is we were segregated, but we really didn't know we were, because it's just the way it was. It always was. We would scrimmage basketball against a black high school, totally black. We were totally white. They'd beat our brains out every year because they were better athletes than we were. But you didn't question. It's just what it was. And it was I guess by the time I got to college, I became uneasy with the way that was. And I know in college, for example, in the fraternity that I was in, I fought to pledge a student who was African American, and that was the first one in our fraternity at that school. And we had people quit when we did, but we had people quit in that. And I think I had been oblivious. I think maybe that was the best word, oblivious. And the more I saw of it, the more uncomfortable I became. And I began to inquire about what's going on and what is life like for so-and-so. I remember the Freedom Riders, certainly, and the killing of those Freedom Riders. And I think I was a little surprised how subtle racism became. It went from being overt to being a little bit more subtle. And I had always thought, being in the South primarily, that things were a lot better in the North. But when I went to the North for my first teaching assignment, I found out, no, it didn't. It's just different. It's not better or worse. It's just very different. But there was absolutely as much racism there. It was just manifested slightly different. But I until I went to college, I had never had a black athlete on the team with me. And we did at college. We had a few, not many, but a few black youngsters. And they were good guys. They were good athletes, just like us. I mean, just basically like us. In the service, we had a lot more folks, African American folks and Hispanics. And of course, when you start teaching, you have mixed classes and so forth. I think I've just always tried to treat everybody like I'd like to be treated. When I grew up on the farm, sharecropping, across the holler, we called it, there was a black family who lived over there, and they sharecropped or did whatever. And I've told Sandy, I probably got as many spankings from that black mother as I did from my own mother, because we'd come home from school and go play. And if we screwed up, she'd pop us on the butt. And if they screwed up at our house, and mother popped them on, but it was just not a big deal. So I think I was just kind of oblivious to all of it until it got in my face. And now I'm probably hypersensitive to it, as I hope lots of people are. We just got a long way to go. A long way to go.
What has provided you with the most satisfaction in life? What are you most proud of?
Good question. Sandy, I think first and foremost, the kids, the grandkids. I think those are joys that you really can't measure. You can measure stuff like getting degrees, teaching jobs, promotions, those things. You can kind of measure, but I think if you're blessed to have good relationships, good kids, that's about as good as it gets.
Thank you
Thank you.
for this interview.
I appreciate it.